Have you ever wondered how the mascots at Walt Disney World must get in the humid Floridian air? Or how they can dance around and wave without even seemingly get tired? I never really paid too much to it. I always wanted to believe it was just some Disney magic that kept those poor people in those costumes from burning going, but it's most things, unfortunately. It's just that simple. It was the summer of 2006. I was 14 at the time, and I took a well-deserved vacation with my family down to Florida to have a magical vacation at the happiest place on earth. Along with my mom, my sister, and of course me. And of course was my Uncle Rick. He lived in Florida, so it wasn't uncommon for him to accompany us on our trips down to Disney World. We visited Disneyland often because it was only about a 5-hour drive from our home park in Phoenix, Arizona. So as you can imagine, it was always a big hit when it was always a big treat for us to fly down to Florida. Me, my mom, and my sister were all huge Disney fans. And when I mean huge Disney memorabilia over our home. Seeing Disney movies, opening night, day, anything Disney, we've done it. That's every one of the reasons this story has been painful to tell, along with many others. My Uncle Rick, on the other hand, he wasn't much of a Disney buff. In fact, he was the opposite. He was a very religious man and always rambling on of his stories of the good old days when he was a teacher at Sunday school. Uncle Rick's significantly older than my mother. They were 12 years apart, I think. I was never really a religious kid, nor that I am, but it didn't affect my relationship with my Uncle Rick. He was a great man, always happy and funny, just always had something about him that all made everyone know who he was when he smiled when you brought him up. I couldn't have asked for a better man to be my mother's brother. My Uncle Rick had always has his likes and dislikes about Disney World. His dislikes were consists of the unnatural happiness of the people there, the crowds, loud sounds, the rides. I don't know how he could have loved the Pirates of the Caribbean either, and especially the way people in the mascot costumes had to stand there for extended periods of time in the blazing heat, just so the people could get a good picture with them. I tried to explain to him that that's their job and that they weren't in any danger, but he would always find a way to counter my argument. Oh, and this doesn't consist of turkey's legs, even though they would still complain about why they were overpriced. He always seemed so pleased when he was at Walt Disney World, and it was obvious that the only reason it was there was because he wanted to spend some time with us. This particular trip to Disney World was different, though. Everything was fine and dandy up until we pulled into the Walt Disney World gate that greets you at the entrance of the Disney property. I noticed that he had an uneasy look on his face as we pressed under it, and then when he got unusually quiet, up until we already parked and left the car. Instead of talking about the usual stories of these good old days, he began to talk about a much darker subject. Hell. It took me off guard, considering that he was never really to bring things up to this subject unless he was telling us not to say it. I just looked at him, and we went on talking about the suffering that goes on down there, and how he hopes that we could never experience anything like that. Then, my mom, when she overheard his ramblings, she abruptly ordered him to cut it out and just be happy that you're here. I never heard my Uncle Rick talk like that, and he had always been so joyful. I could tell from the tone in his voice he was genuinely concerned, but I couldn't just figure it out. What had gotten him to the point that makes him upset, and I just couldn't get what he said out of my head. I don't want you to ever experience suffering like that. I didn't know what he meant. He seemed very unlike of himself. He was sad, not frustrated, not annoyed, just sad. I kept asking him what was wrong, but he just looked the other way and ignored me. We had been in the Magic Kingdom park for about an hour and a half, although I wasn't able to enjoy any of it, considering I was concerned for Uncle Rick the whole time. And we had gone on a few rides. Uncle Rick usually tends to go on the rides with us, even though he doesn't exactly enjoy them. But this time he refused to go on any rides and just sat near the exit waiting for us to get off. We were about to go to the Haunted Mansion when I decided I would hold off and sit down with Rick. I took a seat next to him, and we just sat there quietly for about a half an hour. If you ever been to Disneyland or Disney World, then you'll know how long the lines get. Finally, he muttered something to me. "What?" I asked, trying to direct my focus to him. Was I told something bad would happen today? I could barely understand his quiet voice over all the commotion around us. By what? By who? I urgently back to him. Something unholy, he said, as a tear rolled down his cheek. My heart dropped. This wasn't my usual Uncle Rick talking. This was Uncle Rick was just sad, miserable shell of himself. When my sister and my mom finally got off the ride, I remember looking up and seeing my joyful mom staring down at me. I had been so generally sad that my Uncle Rick was so miserable that I had too had been crying. Although I didn't even want to notice till my mom shouted at me, "Seriously, you too? You've got to be kidding me. Do you know how much goddamn money I spent at this place and you can just have a great time?" That's when I realized I was in the happiest place on earth and I was crying like a baby. I stood up and said, "You're right, let's go to ride Space Mountain. You coming, Uncle Rick?" I remembered the look he gave me. It was an absolute look of sorrow. I felt guilty. He slowly peered himself from the bench. On our way over to Space Mountain, we came across a Mickey Mouse mascot giving out autographs and taking photos with excited children. My sister, who was younger than I was, begged my mom to get a picture with Mickey, and my mom gave in and we walked over. I kept looking over my shoulder to check in on Uncle Rick. Doe's pace slowed as we approached the mascot. My mom and sister stood there in line, eager to get a picture with Mickey. I, on the other hand, was still about 10 feet of him waiting for Uncle Rick. I felt almost angry at my mom for not sympathizing with her own brother, even though something was obviously seriously wrong with him. I stood there waiting for him when he finally caught up and I grabbed his hand to try to assist him over. But our palms met and I noticed that his hand was shockingly cold. I gasped and I jerked my hand away in shock. "Uncle Rick, are you okay?" I asked him in a shaky voice. He just stared at me. His face wasn't different than I ever seen before. It didn't look like my Uncle Rick at all. He just looked like some epitome of misery. I wanted to break down crying. I have never seen a disturbing sight in my life, and not disturbing in a way that made me frightened. It was in a disturbing way that affected me as a person, in a way that I'll never be able to forget. I ran over to my mom and grabbed her arm. "We need to leave now." She just looked at me with a puzzled look on her face. "No, we don't. Your uncle is just..." She then stopped in mid-sentence and looked behind me with a shocked look on her face. I was hesitant to turn around because the look on her face knew I was about to see was going to be bad. I could never imagine how bad it was going to be. Finally, I convinced myself to turn around. Before me, I saw my Uncle Rick standing maybe 15 feet away from me. He was looking at the Mickey mascot, and the Mickey was looking at him. That's when I noticed that the Mickey's body was facing the opposite direction of Mickey's head. I wasn't quite understanding why the mascot looked like that. Wouldn't the Walt Disney employees put a stop to this? What was happening? That's when it happened. In an instant, Mickey mascot let out a deafening sound that resembled the thousands of people screaming. I cupped my ears trying to drown out the noise, but it was no use. Then, just as soon as it started, the noise stopped. I looked up and Mickey was no more than 2 feet away from my face. Its face was distorted. It had black eyes with small white pupils with huge rat-like teeth front, surrounded what looked like hundreds of bloody human teeth, filling the gums of Mickey's mouth. The skin of the mascot was gray, and the material looked aged and rotten. When I heard it say, in a voice that sounded like 1,000 people talking at once, "But we're all puppets. Nothing more than a test that's where to come." I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. I could only watch as a blink of an eye, the Mickey was standing right in front of my Uncle Rick. The mascot's head slowly lifted off the body. By some unseen force, I saw a reddish black liquid pour out of the neck and spilled down the body of my mascot. My Uncle Rick started screaming bloody murder. Then something happened. I'm not sure what happened. I turned my head and covered my eyes in an attempt to shield myself from what was happening to my Uncle Rick. I then woke up in a cold sweat on the concrete, screaming as my family and some Disney cast members crowded around me. I saw my Uncle Rick looking down with me with concern in my eyes. I jolted to my feet and grabbed Uncle Rick by the arm. "Please, Rick, we need to go. Please." He placed his hand on mine. It was warm again. He told me with a smile on his face that everything was okay. I had just fainted from the heat. I didn't know I didn't faint. It took me a few seconds to come back to reality, and when I did, I hugged Uncle Rick. I have never hugged anyone before. I sat down with my own cast members, only in the area to cool down. And even though I wasn't really that hot, they gave me some water and told me to relax. The paramedics will be here soon. I reassured them I was fine, mainly because I wanted to get the hell out of there, but my efforts were useless. The paramedics arrived and I was taken to the nearest emergency room. The nurse did some tests and talked to the doctor for a while. I was fine, nothing was wrong with me. I knew what I saw was real. I just couldn't stop imagining it. And even if I did, nothing imaginary could be that real. I laid in that hospital bed and stared at the ceiling for a good 2 hours. That's when it occurred to me that the place they took me to sit down I supposedly fainted was one of the mascot's exit and entries. I felt cold when I recalled seeing a reddish-black liquid puddle on the floor on the entrance of the wet floor sign on it. It was the same liquid I saw coming out of the costume. My heart was racing, and my palms were sweating. I was trying to convince myself that they were right, and I somehow did faint. It was all an imaginary. But then why the hell was that liquid on the floor? I was starting to panic when my mom slowly walked in the room. Her cheeks were drenched in tears, and her hands were filled with tissue. I then stopped dead in my tracks. I don't know how, but I knew. I knew something had happened to my Uncle Rick. She sat down in a chair next to my bed, put her hand on mine. She told me what happened. Every word felt like a knife sinking deeper and deeper into my heart. My uncle had shot himself that night when he had a Bible clenched to his hand when he did it. He was dead. I knew why, but no one else would. A happy, joyful, funny man like he was just inside. He just didn't wanted to blow his brains out one night. No, so something happened to him. That mascot did something to him. I didn't see because I looked away. I felt as if I hadn't looked away, I could have saved him somehow. But I can't now. He's dead. I don't have anything to do with Disney anymore. When I moved out of my mom's, I burned everything Disney I owned. I refused to go back there. I don't know what I saw that day, even if I can still see it as clear as day. I still feel sick every time I think of what happened. I didn't look for answers, and I never did. I don't want any clue to what it was. I still think I knew 1,000 times worse than remaining clueless. All I know is as it seems, as if there's people other than the fun atmosphere or the job benefits that people kept working by Disney. Maybe there's something to life more than general. Maybe something we'll never understand until we're dead. Maybe did I just faint it through? Maybe it was just a costume. Well, that was It's Just a Costume by HillHank, a Disneyland creepypasta. My final thoughts on this story. This is actually a pretty messed up creepypasta, especially with the fact that, of this one demonic, really messed up Mickey Mouse mascot costume that ends up, doing something really messed up and all. It was just really crazy. Like, I'm not gonna lie, when I actually saw that story, I honestly really have to say that I was pretty surprised with the whole story of its own self. I mean, I remember watching Seabass narrated this story, as well as Silver Stories, and I know a few other people have also read this story, so I gotta really say, it was a pretty messed up story, in my opinion. It still was a pretty interesting concept for the story, having something like It's Just a Costume creepypasta being really messed up in general. But like I said, though, I honestly really do like how the story went out, especially with the concept and the great time and effort into it. I really have to say it was really fun and well made. I honestly gotta really say it did feel really good. Like, with the whole story of its own self and that, it's just flat out amazing. So, I gotta really say, I had fun, actually, reading this story. I mean, I can understand, why the person probably has some, some PTSD, flashbacks of, this event or something. Which, I mean, I don't blame them for it, because it's honestly, something I can honestly see happening, with this. So, but despite that, I honestly still thought it was a pretty good story. I do like the concept. I thought it was really well made in detail. I do like the good grammar as well as the sentence structuring, storyline, and everything that went out. It's honestly a pretty good story. I do like it. I thought it was neat. So I can definitely say it's a pretty awesome, well-made story. I mean, the grammar is good and all. Really gotta say, it's flat out pretty awesome. So, I guess with that being the case, and with that being the case, and that being said, I do want to say, I do repeat myself, but like I said, I really like this story. So to HillHank, if you happen to come across this video, feel free to let me know down below how you feel of this story. I honestly say that you did an awesome job with this story. It's a pretty awesome story. You did pretty good. So with that being the case, and that being said, I'm just going to sit here and wrap up this review. There's nothing really much more I can say, but I definitely got to say it's a really great, well-made story. So, anyways, with that being said and that being the case, I'm going to sit here and just say right now that this is just simply my own personal opinion, and if you happen to disagree with me, that's perfectly fine too. We're all entitled to our own opinions in regards to these creepypastas, and this is simply my own personal thoughts. I'm going to give this story a, I'm going to give it like a 10 out of 10. It's a really awesome story. It's definitely well made. There's definitely a lot of time and effort into the story, and I personally really do like how this went out, as well as a good concept for it of its own self. I honestly flat out really enjoy it. So anyways, with that being the case and that being said, what did you guys personally think of this creepypasta? Did you all enjoy it? Did you all not? Also, what we have done personally to help make this story a lot better. Feel free to let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. I'm the Lion Queen. Thank you so much for watching today's episode. If you're brand new here to this channel, be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Ring the bell for notifications to when I upload, so that way you guys will not miss an upload. And as always, I'm going to sit here and say, please roll the outro because I'm out of here. And I'll be catching you guys all in the next video. Peace out.